Hola y'all, it's Michelle and you are watching Shelly Flowers Reads and Writes, my YouTube channel where I talk all things books, writing, sometimes teaching, sometimes parenting, and just give a general sense of how I'm feeling about the literary world of today. So, like I said before, my name is Michelle Flores, and today I'm going to be filming something that I have been really excited to do because it involves one of my favorite activities in the world, cleaning and reorganizing. So today is going to be my very first book unhaul for YouTube. Now, I just want to go ahead and start off by saying that unhauling books is something that I've done my entire life for a lot of different reasons that I can get into. But the main thing is that I have, especially as an adult, always lived in a place where I've had a limited amount of space for the books that I want. When I was a teenager, high school, I actually had this bookshelf behind me and the bookshelf that's in my kids' room now in my own room. So I had those two massive bookshelves for myself. Plus, my dad, in every single house that we owned, would build these really cool corner shelves that would go right up near the ceiling, like about 1.5 feet away from the ceiling. And I had that storage space for books as well. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I probably amassed a collection of close to 500 books. Now, the thing is, like most young adults, I moved around a lot. And so over that time, I have just, through the natural process, unhauled books and gotten rid of them. And now I'm down to this one bookshelf behind me in terms of all the books that I own. My bookshelf is organized in a pretty straightforward way, so I just kind of want to talk about how it's organized and why it's organized this way, and then we can jump into my unhaul for the month. All right, guys, so here is my bookshelf, my beautiful, amazing, wonderful bookshelf. So first up in this section here, we have my miscellaneous books. So these aren't really books necessarily. These are a lot of independent literary journals. We have some graphic novels here. We have some plays and old journals that I've written in. This is basically just a dump of all kinds of things that I don't really know where else to put them, so this is where they go. I would also like to point out that some of these are journals that I've actually been published in, which I can talk about in another video on what it means to be published in a literary journal. Then next up is my favorite section, my poetry collection. I've actually started unhauling some of these books recently, but as you can see, I've got a lot of books of poetry and I love them all so much. So next here is my fiction section. I've got a lot of YA, but I've also got a good amount of literary fiction. That's my son at his preschool graduation. He's so adorable. Some more of my fiction books. That's me and my sister in the tub as kids. Then this shelf, second to last shelf, is all of my nonfiction. I am actually someone who does not like nonfiction, but I've grown to like it over the years. I have a lot of books about teaching practice and just about working in different companies, but I've also got nonfiction books like Becoming by Michelle Obama, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Last shelf is my TBR shelf. So this shelf is just a mix of so many books I've collected over the years where I thought I was supposed to read these books and I just haven't gotten around to it. I don't know, it's just, that's why I'm kind of excited for this time where we're social distancing, because I think it's forcing me to really take stock of what I own and figure out what I want to keep and what I don't want to keep. I've actually already read I've read 6 books on my TBR shelf, so I'm hoping I can definitely clear out some of this stuff from the shelf. All right, so now that you've gotten a chance to take a look at my bookshelf and just basically see how I organize it, why I choose the books that I do, I want to go into my unhauling process. So as you can see, space is really limited in my house. I live in a 2-bedroom condo and I have 2 kids, a dog, and a husband. It's a lot of us in here. And so because of that, I don't want to keep so much clutter. And I kind of do this naturally with a lot of the things that I own. I don't like buying new products until I've used up all of something that I have. It's kind of like Marie Kondo, you know, if it doesn't spark joy, then it's not for me. Although I'm not so regimented about the system that I have, because there are definitely some things that I love to hoard, and that's a whole other conversation. But with that being said, because I've moved around so much over the years, I have naturally become someone who just unhauls books every once in a while. And I just started doing this system in the past year and I really like it. I think it's probably the best unhauling system that I have that actually gets me really excited because it makes space for things that I love even more. So essentially, because I only have one shelf and because space is limited, I only keep books that I rate 3 stars or more. It's not a perfect system yet because it's something that I'm trying out now. So I'm still getting rid of some books that I actually, have never rated before. But as the system becomes more consistent, I know I will eventually only have books that are rated 3 stars and above. I'm so excited about this. I love this idea of having a library where I've read all of the books that I own, and I love all of the books that I own. I am in this point in my life where I don't want to go just based off of how something looks. I also want to consider how I feel about it when I look at it. And so that is something that just brings me so much joy. It's just thinking about owning all books that I've rated 4 and 5 stars. So yeah. Now I will also say my rating system is not that complex. I literally just go based off my enjoyment of a book. There could be genres that I hate where I still rate something 5 stars. There could be genres that I love and I still rate something 2 stars. I am not too precious about it. I think because I am a writer as well, I'm so used to taking feedback and rejection. I don't really take it that personally, and when I give feedback, I try not to keep it personal. I keep it more based off the craft. Which is what brings us to our little unhaul for today. So let's go ahead and get started. Book number 1. This book is called WTF, How to Survive 101 of Life's Worst Fucking Situations. Now, this book is one of those books that everybody has because they get it in some kind of white elephant joke gift situation, and nobody actually reads. If I had a bigger house, this might actually be more of a coffee table or like one of those bathroom kind of books, but since I don't, it doesn't serve me anymore. I did not rate this on Goodreads, but if I did have to rate it, it would probably be a 2-star rating. Next up, I talked about this book in my March wrap-up. This is StrengthsFinder 2.0. I rated this book 2 stars. I actually had 2 copies of this, so I am keeping one. My husband suggested that I keep it, and I'm getting rid of this one because it has not been used, and I figure even though I didn't get that much enjoyment out of it, someone else might. I already talked about how I felt about this book in that video, which I will link below or somewhere above once I learn how to do all that. Basically, I just feel like there are other books that say the same thing better and more detailed, so this just wasn't my taste. Next, we have this travel guide from the Lonely Planet on Washington, D.C. I did not rate this book. I got it as a gift like, oh my God, 11 years ago. I'm so old. This book is a travel guide by The Lonely Planet. I'm getting rid of it because it's, like I said, over 10 years old, and at this point it's just out of date. It's not something that's going to be useful to me. I've actually never even looked at it. I'm not big on travel guides. I never have been. These were really popular back before the internet was as prolific as it is now, so it's kind of obsolete that I like, and maybe I'll do a video about that. But for now, this one just does not serve me. Okay. Our next book, Peace Like a River. This book has been on my TBR shelf for, I think, a full decade, and I just never got around to reading it because every time I tried, I just couldn't get into it, whatever. So I finally picked it up like a month ago in March and forced myself to get through it. I hated it. I just could not get into it. I rated this 1 star on Goodreads. I think I said 2 stars in the video, but when I checked my Goodreads account, it was actually 1 star. This protagonist just did not do it for me. Because the narrator is the protagonist, it creates all kinds of different issues. So this was a 1 star for me. Next up, we have a book for teachers. So if you are a teacher on YouTube and you're looking for books that might be helpful in your classroom, I would say that this is the book for you. I read this book during my 5th year of teaching. So I feel like 5th year teachers, that is really where you start to hit your stride. You have planning pretty much down packed. You've got a good sense of your behavior management style. You know the type of culture you want to set in your class, essentially. And I think this book is really great for teachers who are really into practicing mindfulness with their students. That being said, I actually found a lot of the suggestions in this book inapplicable to my own classroom. I worked in Title I schools for 8 years, and I just felt like a lot of the techniques in here, while were helpful for my students, I also recognize that a lot of my students have really significant trauma that simple mindfulness techniques are just not going to address. A lot of my students actually need legitimate counseling that I myself am not trained to provide. And so I felt like I was actually doing my students a disservice from using some of these techniques. Although I recognize now that I'm not teaching in Title I schools, I can 100% see how a book like this would be really beneficial. So I don't know, if you are a teacher and you are looking into mindfulness into your classroom, I would say this is definitely a good book to check out. Me personally, I just didn't find it particularly helpful, so I rated it 2 stars. This is just one of those where I think it's like good ideas, it's just not for me. This book is another teacher book, Reading Without Limits by Maddie Witter. I love this book. I actually think this book is amazing, and I think that this book is so great for a first or second year English teacher, or not even an English teacher, even if you're just like a regular content teacher who wants to embed literacy in your classroom. This is a really great book to use. I love the techniques that Maddie talks about. This is a book produced by the KIP network, which is a network I used to work for. I think so oftentimes teachers go about reading instruction in the complete wrong way. And that's what I love about this book, is that it focuses less on all of these fancy like lexile levels and, you know, running records and all of that kind of stuff, and focuses just on independent reading instruction, because studies show time and time again, it really doesn't matter, you know, the level and the complexity of the text that kids are reading, because if they are reading consistently and abundantly, those things naturally increase. Now, granted, you also want to make sure if you're teaching high school, college level students, they're not just reading graphic novels or chapter books all day. You want to give them some of that richer, more literary text, but because they have built their independent reading level up so much by reading often, it becomes a lot easier to do that. I used basically every single one of these techniques when I was a reading teacher, and I'll tell you, my state test scores were never better. My kids loved reading. There was actually one point in the school year, because we used to do accelerated reader, where a lot of my students, this was back when I taught at an all-boys charter school, they created their own book club, and they would share books with each other, talk to each other about the books, take quizzes for each other. And yeah, technically they're cheating, but I just love this idea of kids loving reading so much that they went above and beyond to try and show that they were the strongest readers in the grade level. So I think overall, if you are someone who is wanting to embed independent reading into your classroom, this is an excellent choice. The only reason I'm getting rid of this is because I already have my own copy, and this is just an additional copy that I had. So I would love for someone else to have it, especially a first-year teacher. If you are a first-year teacher watching this and you maybe can't afford to purchase this book, please message me, please let me know. I will get in touch with you. I'll send this to you for free. I just think it's something that everyone should have. Next up, this book is actually not my book, it is my husband's book. So this is Understanding English Grammar. This was a book that he used in college. I did not rate this book, he did not rate this book. He has not used it in like 15 years, whenever he graduated, because he's a little bit older than me. But overall, I would say that this book is actually really helpful if you're someone who struggles with grammar. But it's very old school. Like, they're literally diagramming sentences in here. That's not really a practice that's done that often anymore, although I do think it's helpful. So if you're someone who struggles with grammar and making your syntax, meaning your sentence structure, a lot more interesting, this could be a really helpful book. But for me, I'm fairly good with grammar. Spelling is a whole other situation. I'm a terrible speller, which is so ironic because I teach English and I'm a writer and I read constantly, but I've always been a bad speller. So anyway, this is not a conversation about spelling. This is a conversation about this book, why I'm getting rid of it. It no longer serves me. It no longer serves my husband. So we've just decided it's time to get rid of it. Our next book. This book I actually got for free when I was in my graduate school program. This was another book that was on my bookshelf for like 10 years. And I just never picked it up until last year. So 2019, I read this book. This is called The Nervous Filaments by David Dodd Lee. I hated this book. This is a book of poetry. I love poetry, but this book reminds me of the reasons why people don't like poetry. Also, if you hear snoring in the background, I'm sorry, it's my dog. She's like legit passed out on the floor right now. But this book was just word salad. I think when people say that they don't like poetry, that's what they mean. They just mean poems that are just so many fancy words thrown together and they don't make any kind of sense. So many of reviews of this book say the same thing. They say that it's really difficult to get into, it's dense, blah, 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 and they still rate it 4 and 5 stars. I don't get that. I don't know if it's because I tend to prefer more narrative poetry, or I think it's also just that just because something's complicated doesn't mean it's good, and oftentimes poets get that confused. So for me, this was a 1 star. David Dodd Lee, nah. I also think there's a big conversation about white male cishet poets and whether or not they're actually good at what they do. And I've got to be honest, I don't think I've read any poetry by any white male cishet authors that I've actually enjoyed. Unless we're talking about really old school stuff like Oconee Island of the Mind, which I reviewed in my poetry video, which I will link somewhere when I figure out how to do that. So I don't know. There's this joke on Twitter that says poetry is one of the things where white men think that they're the best at it, but literally everyone else is better at it than them. And I personally think it's true. Every single book of poetry that I've loved, that I've rated 4 stars, tends to be either from a woman, a writer of color, or an LGBTQ person. I just find that there's a level of connection that I can't get to because so often white male cishet literary authors, especially in today's contemporary time, tend to focus so much more on being clever than on actually writing something well. So I don't know, that's probably a bigger conversation. If that's a video you'd be interested in me doing, let's talk about it. Let me know in the comments down below. But this, trash. Okay, this brings me to my last book that I am unhauling. Gerald Stern, Early Collected Poems from 1965 to 1992. I got this book for a grad school class, so I actually purchased this book with my own money, and it's in fairly good condition, which tells you something because I am an annotator. I write on everything. My books are always like the pages get all flimsy because when I like a book, I live in that book for a while. I have a few poems highlighted, but I read this for a grad school course. Nobody, I think, in that class liked this book. Everybody thought it was super dry and boring, and so it just wasn't for me. I think, you know, that's the tough thing with grad school, especially if you're going to go to grad school for literature or for writing. You have to be ready to read a lot of stuff from people that you don't necessarily like. I think I learned from it in terms of structure when I was in grad school, but to be honest, I don't remember anything about this book. And as I noticed I was running out of space on my poetry shelf, I figured if I can't remember anything about a book, let me make space for stuff that I know I'm gonna remember. And so that's what I'm doing. I would say it's not terrible. And if you're someone who's into reading classics, Gerald Stern is definitely someone that you need to learn from. It's just not for me. So I didn't rate it, probably not going to rate it, but I'm getting rid of it. Okay, so those are all the books that I am unhauling. Basically, how I unhaul my books is I will post them on Amazon for sale, and then after 6 months, if none of them sell, I try and donate them. How that's gonna work right now, given that we're in this quarantine situation, I don't know. So I'm not even sure if post offices are open. So I don't really know how that'll work. If you are interested in purchasing one of the books from me, I will link my Amazon store below. If you're also just interested in getting your own copies, I will also put links for each of these books down below. Even though I didn't like them, I think there are definitely a few that you will enjoy, except for Reading Without Limits. I think all reading teachers should read that book at some point in their careers. Even if you're a 20-year veteran, it's always great to get new ideas. But that's pretty much it from me today. So I would love to hear from y'all and your process for unhauling books. Do you have like a really set regular process like me, or is yours a little bit more loosey-goosey? You kind of just go with the flow and unhaul whenever you need to? Are you more minimalist and you don't really keep books in your home unless you absolutely 100% love them? I think these are all really interesting conversations to have on personal responsibility and having a personal space for literacy. So let me know, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, guys, if you want to follow me on a more regular basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Shelly Flowers. If you are interested in buying my own book, Cuentos from the Swamp, Poetry About Growing Up in South Florida, go ahead and find the link down below. And I really hope that you have some fun with your unhauling and cleaning and renewing and making space for the things that you love in the coming months. I'll talk to y'all later.